So if you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering which one is right for me, the Ricoh GR III or the Ricoh GR IIIx. So between both the GR III and the GR IIIx, these Ricoh cameras are pretty much exactly the same in terms of functionality, menu, film simulations, and even image quality. The main difference is going to be between their focal lengths, the 28mm for the Ricoh GR III and the 40mm for the GR IIIx. At the surface level, usually the GR III, which is the 28mm, is better for capturing wider shots, and it tends to be better for street photography as well, and anything that is interiors or architecture based. On the other hand, the GR IIIx, which is the 40mm equivalent, is pretty much more versatile for everyday type of photos, especially those situations where you're unsure of what type of subject you're going to be shooting. But I'd be lying if I said it was just that simple, because it really is a little bit more nuanced than that, especially once you take into consideration what type of genre you're planning to shoot. And before we dive into those details, I did want to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, Squarespace. I've actually been using Squarespace for over 10 years now. Their templates and easy to use interface make it incredibly simple to create and maintain a professional looking website without any coding experience necessary. My Squarespace website was an essential part of how I built my photography business. It allowed me to showcase my portfolio, share recent work on my blog, and receive inquiries from potential clients through a contact form. If you're one of those photographers that are relying on just your Instagram profile as the sole place to share your work and build your photography business online, I would really consider making a website on Squarespace. You can visit squarespace.com/RadioBallesteros to start a free trial and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I think the most popular scenario that people want to pick up a Ricoh GR camera is for just the everyday pocketability. So if you're looking to photograph just everyday moments, documenting your life when you're out and about, I would really recommend the GR IIIx for its 40mm focal length, as it really is kind of the best field of view for general everyday use, especially when you don't know exactly what you'll be photographing that day. It can handle a variety of different subjects, whether it be people, scenes, food, objects, cars even. I think the only exception is if you're going to be shooting indoors or wide scenes, you kind of have to think about how tight the space is, because if you're going to want to shoot in very tight indoor scenes, or even if you just prefer a distorted look overall, the 28mm or the Ricoh GR III might be a better fit for you for those everyday moments. One other consideration is going to be if you're going to be using the snap focus feature a lot, which is basically zone focusing system on the Ricoh. The 28mm or the Ricoh GR III has a deeper snap focus range when it's fully stopped down in comparison to the 40mm or the GR IIIx when fully stopped down. So if you're going to be using zone focus or snap focus all the time, consider the limitations between each of these models. Because I'm a dad and I have young kids and I often show photos of my family taken with the Ricohs, I get asked a lot about which camera is best for photographing kids and for your family. And for this, it really comes down to kind of like their activity level and their age. If you have young children, especially if they're toddlers, not quite able to listen to instructions very clearly, I would suggest a 28mm or the Ricoh GR III for photographing this kind of age group, because they're pretty spontaneous. You don't ever know what they're going to do. At the same time, as a parent, you want to stay kind of close by and be within arm's reach to be able to kind of like grab them or keep them out of harm's way if you need to intervene quickly if they're going to be in danger or fall down. Or if your kids are a little bit older, for example, my kids are school age now, I tend to use the GR IIIx a lot more now. Specifically, that 40mm field of view is going to be a little bit more compressed in comparison to the wide angle for portraits, especially if you have older kids or if you have the ability to have another parent or another family member or friend help you kind of like supervise the kids, then you can step back a little bit and get that portrait. I will say though, when it comes to autofocusing, you really have to get familiar with pre-focusing or stopping down your lens with these cameras, because both cameras can actually struggle quite a bit with autofocus. They're not the best autofocusing cameras, especially once you get indoors. It's really hard to focus on faces and things like that unless you have a very high contrast area. So for those who are considering it for this sole purpose, I want you to be aware of that. It could be a deal breaker for you, especially if you're coming from a very fast autofocus system. When it comes to street photography, I will say that I am a total beginner. I actually wouldn't categorize the type of photos that I do when I'm out doing photo walks as street photography, but I know a lot of people are considering these cameras for street photography. So if you're a beginner like me and someone who is still trying to learn how to get comfortable approaching subjects, these candid subjects on the street, I would think that the 40mm focal length, the Ricoh GR IIIx, is going to be something that I would suggest to you as you're learning this skill and the comfort level. But if you are more experienced street photographer, I know a few street photographers that have Ricoh cameras and they tend to use the 28mm wide angle just because it has that increased versatility. It has a little bit of more kind of like a raw, punchier look with the distortion, and of course the depth of field range for snap focus, which a lot of street photographers use that zone focusing for very quick impromptu shots. That GR3 allows for closer and more dynamic compositions and keeping everything in focus. The Ricoh cameras are also great for travel as a sole travel camera, or to bring another camera to pair with a different system. I would recommend a 40mm focal length or GR IIIx for travel if you're unsure about what you'll be photographing, because it can handle portraits of your travel mates and also like abstract details of any type of scenes or textures that you see in your travel environment. It also does pretty well for food too, because most of the time when I'm traveling, I'm trying a lot of different kinds of foods. But if you already know that you're going to go for a lot wider scenes, you're going to be venturing into a lot of architecture and documenting those on your travels, and also if you want to have a little bit more intimate travel moments where you can get closer, then maybe consider the GR3. Think about how much room you actually have to work with. Are you going to be able to step back? Because then the 40mm can usually cover everything. Also think about if you're okay with the potential of distortion so that you can have the versatility of the wider field of view, then the 28mm might be the one for your trip. If this is going to be your first camera, your first kind of like real camera transitioning from a smartphone, I would suggest usually the Ricoh GR IIIx with its 40mm equivalent, because it's going to give you a more noticeable difference in terms of the rendering of the photo, as most smartphones actually use a 28mm or 24mm equivalent focal length for the main camera. But if you're someone who wants to have just more control and maybe the film simulations or the raw processing power of the Ricohs, but you want something that's more familiar and similar to the smartphone kind of like rendering of the focal length, then maybe the Ricoh GR III is going to be the one for you with its 28mm focal length. If you have a Ricoh GR III or a GR IIIx, I'm curious to know which camera you chose and why did you choose it, because I think having that context from everybody can create a very helpful resource in the comments of this video. And since now we covered the difference between the GR III and the GR IIIx, you may be wondering what is the difference and utility between the regular models and the HDF, the highlight diffusion filter models. And I have a video over here that you can check out to learn more about those cameras.